Goodbye is by the Reverend Bruce Southworth. For a moment, mystery has bested authority. Those words rang in my ears and vibrated deep within my soul when I heard Starhawk tell this story last June at our denominational gathering in New Haven. For me, it was a story about God, or at least God's presence for a moment. You should know that I am leery about glib God talk. I don't believe in a supernatural Father God out there somewhere. For a long time, such ideas poisoned my mind totally against any and all interest in speaking about God. And metaphors for God, for what is absolutely trustworthy, for the sacred or slippery, difficult, sometimes misleading. Nonetheless, I dare to speak about and believe that God, if God exists in our midst, fiercely present in nature, and in human affairs, often hidden, but at times wildly, boldly present. These women chanted, and the guards were dazed. Mystery enters and transformation occurs when we are faithful partners with the Spirit of life. Last June at our denominational gathering in New Haven, I went to hear Starhawk speak. I imagine there were at least 500 people there, maybe more. I confess that I went with curiosity and a little apprehension. After all, Starhawk describes herself as a practitioner of the old religion of the goddess of witchcraft. I went to hear her carrying with me deeply embedded negative stereotypes, mitigated by a sense of toleration, but nonetheless carrying a dose of skepticism. It's funny how you can sometimes, not always, change. This witch was knowledgeable, playful, articulate, impassioned, eloquent at times. What I discovered in listening to her, and what I sensed at first, is that she embraces a truly religious path of liberating power. These were not my symbols, language, or liturgy, but I sensed a healing word and a prophetic word, healthy religion. Starhawk declared a theology quite in keeping with Unitarian Universalist values and convictions about the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, about the interconnectedness of all existence, the preciousness of life and Mother Earth in caps, the importance of personal experience, a theology of relationship and mutuality. She combines spiritual sensitivity with radical activism in terms of peace and justice issues. She affirms the power of the imagery of the goddess in her life as a doorway, a metaphor, an image of mystery that cannot be captured totally by any one symbol. Yet she is not at all dogmatic. She certainly dashed my preconceptions about witches. For most of us in our society, the idea of witches and witchcraft has been tainted by a dominant patriarchal religious inheritance going back to the medieval inquisitions. This morning, my concern is our bondage to the past. My theme is the power of ideas to liberate or to cripple. Specifically, I want to spiral around some of the myths and fairy tales that inform and degrade our culture. We are profoundly conditioned, women and men alike, in patterns of thought and action that overlook or undervalue women. Religious myths and fairy tales are carriers and custodians of social values, and the myths need to be re-examined, exposed, cast off, or recast. Brainwashed as we are by our pervasive sexism, this morning I invite you to join me in an effort to scrub at, if not wash away, some of the pollutants we have inherited. Blessings. First of all, let's kiss Sleeping Beauty goodbye. You remember the fairy tale, I imagine. There are many variants in Western culture, but they all include common elements of the birth of a beautiful infant, an evil one, a jealous queen, slighted goddess or god, a revenge curse, a lethal spindle, and a finger pricked at puberty, a long sleep, an impenetrable hedge of thorns, an unmarried king or prince, and a kiss that awakens. Fairy tales in general may be thought of metaphors of human personality, of struggles toward freedom, of coming to terms with basic fears. At one level, the Sleeping Beauty story is about the onset of puberty and sexuality, and the sleep is sometimes used as a period of concentration of powers and quiet preparation for fulfillment. But fulfillment for what? Woman is idealized in terms of her being, and certainly there is no image of doing, acting, taking charge, becoming. Madonna Kolbenschlag puts it this way: at the universal level of meaning, Sleeping Beauty is most of all a symbol of passivity, and by extension, a metaphor for the spiritual condition of women, cut off from autonomy and transcendence, from self-actualization and ethical capacity in a male-dominated milieu. This is a heavy indictment, and yet, isn't it true? She goes on to speak about the socialization process of girls into adulthood and the dependency bred into women. When asked the opposite of dependence, man will respond, independence. Women, according to one study, will answer isolation, loneliness. Of course, loneliness is one of life's greatest pains, even for those who do learn the virtues of solitude. No one totally escapes loneliness. As for many women, escaping loneliness is an accepting of dependency. Scarlett O'Hara is a classic, if uncommon, example of rebellion against expectations. And I'm not going to do it with a southern accent. I'm tired of everlastingly being unnatural and never doing anything I want to do. I'm tired of acting like I don't eat more than a bird, and walking when I want to run, and saying I feel faint after a waltz when I could dance for 2 days and never get tired. I'm tired of saying how wonderful you are to fool men who haven't got one half the sense I've got. And I'm tired of pretending I don't know anything so men can tell me things and feel important while they're doing it. But more often the story is one of passivity, of waiting, of loss of creativity. Dory Previn speaks about it in her Lamentation, a poem titled Left Hand Lost. Sometimes I get so low, so low. Sometimes I get so depressed as though I lost a part of me that loved me, the part that knew me best. My right hand fills the china teacups and needle points with old maid aunts. My right hand clings to rosary beads and waters dying plants. But it's never painted a picture nor run for president. My left hand might have done these things if its roots had not been bent. A sculptor, a poet it might have been, instead of a useless thing, to decorate with bangles and bracelets and my mother's wedding ring. Valkyries took what they wanted by sheer female force, but real women had to learn to mask their aggressiveness. Women are expected to be passive, less assertive. You know the story. That you are here in a church like this suggests to me that the story is no longer your story, if it ever was. Yet the myth lingers despite women's progress. The fairy tale remains and undermines the spiritual health and vitality of so many women. Madonna Kolbenschlag suggests that the image of Sleeping Beauty passively awaiting a prince is deeply ingrained. That women should be nearly comatose or drugged with tranquilizers or declared mentally ill if they get too rebellious. Or they become consummate consumers. Not all, but many. I'm reminded of the Stepford Wives when I read that paragraph. This is how our society trains so many women, and Kolbenschlag not only wants to expose it, but also to suggest a path of spiritual growth. She outlines movement through 3 stages. Existence under control of external authority and conditioning, the image of a comatose Sleeping Beauty. The new life that comes with self-assertion and self-fulfillment. And not only self-fulfillment and personal autonomy, but also something quite remarkable, the religious path, the spiritual awareness of self-transcendence. This self-transcendence is, I think, akin to that awakening spirit of solidarity that Starhawk describes. In that example, women exercising collectively, not just individual, power through chanting in jail. What if fundamental is a transformation of consciousness? Here is the kiss of life for which we live, not the kiss of some prince to whom one is subservient. Be wary of the image of Sleeping Beauty, she warns. What are we passing on to our children in these lovely tales? Another fairy tale that she examines is that of Cinderella, one of our best loved tales with at least 345 documented versions of rags to riches. The elements are familiar. An ill-treated heroine giving numerous tasks, magic animals that assist her, the meeting at the ball, her flight at midnight, a lost slipper, the shoe test, the sisters' mutilation of their feet as they desire to be the chosen one, the discovery of Cinderella as the true bride, and the happy marriage. There are obvious moral lessons that surface appearances tell nothing about the inner worth of a person, that if one is true to oneself, one can triumph over those who pretend to be what they are not, and that virtue will be rewarded and evil punished. All of that is fine, but Kohlenschlag warns us, when the prince offers Cinderella the lost slipper, he makes his kingdom hers. This is surely to her benefit. But then typically, what does she do with this power? She lives happily ever after and is never heard from again. She disappears, and Kolbenschlag concludes, for the prince, we should read Patriarchy. Those lovely tales, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and so many more that we tell our children reinforce images of passivity, subservience, and proper behavior, and entirely omit female creativity, self-actualization, growth, or maturity. What a tangled web. This week, while these thoughts raced through my mind, my young daughter received as a present a Cinderella picture puzzle. Taken out of context of the larger story, this picture is not so bad, for the fairy godmother is standing by her side blessing her. Or is it the goddess? For a moment, I want to leave the fairy tales and turn to Rianne Elsler's provocative book, The Chalice and the Blade. She articulates a theory of cultural transformation wherein human society changed from a partnership society to a dominator society. The chalice, the shared cup of life, was replaced by the sword, and social organization became patriarchal. She highlights the profoundly egalitarian nature of the Minoan civilization of ancient Crete. And of course her argument is in part is that patriarchy is not the way it has always been, and certainly is not adaptive to the evolutionary scheme of things. For me, one of Eisler's most intriguing discussion focuses on the Garden of Eden story, with the triumph of the blade of invading conquerors who used the sword ruthlessly. About 7,000 years ago, a new male-dominated culture took root, and in the process, the ancient goddess imagery and myths, which were more egalitarian, had to be transformed. God the Father, for example, comes to replace the goddess, and with it comes a culture of violence. Specifically, she points out how the Garden of Eden functions on many symbolic levels to repudiate the early culture, the old period. She points out that the image of the serpent had a long history of association and identification with the image of the goddess, both in Egypt and in ancient Greece. For example, she reminds us of the intertwining snakes that are still a part of the medical professional symbol. With the advent of a patriarchal, domineering, warlike god, a god who of course legitimized the activities of the invading tribes, the goddess had to be destroyed or neutralized. For example, the symbol of the snake had to be incorporated or banished. In ancient Greece, the snake not only becomes the symbol of wisdom from the oracle at Delphi, but also begins to emerge on Athena's shield. It becomes a symbol of war as well as wisdom. In Judaism, the snake was a symbol of the divine power given to Moses by God. One of the treasures in the Holy of Holies, the Ark, was initially a serpent symbol, and it was not until about 700 BCE that the image of the serpent was removed from the temple in Jerusalem. Regarding the usurping of the goddess, Eisler points out that for Eve to listen to the serpent would not only be expected, but also required as a matter of religious duty. She says, "It is no accident that Eve, in fact, follows the advice of the serpent. From the perspective of the earlier reality, the order of this powerful upstart, Yahweh, that Eve may not eat from a sacred tree, either knowledge or divine wisdom or of life, would have been not only unnatural but sacrilegious. So in terms of the old reality, God had no right to give such orders. But having been given them, neither Eve nor the serpent, as a representative of the goddess, could be expected to obey. Eve's sin, then, is her refusal to give up the old worship, and her punishment is horrendous, as a warning to all who do not obey. All in all, the new myth makers, in vilifying the serpent and Eve, are discrediting the goddess. One function of mythology is to describe the social order and to give it divine sanction, and the patriarchal biblical mythology does indeed do that. Eisler goes on to speak about the sexism of much of the Bible, although she points out that Jesus himself challenged the patriarchal structure by affirming the dignity of women. The histories of Judaism and Christianity have not been noble ones in their treatment of women. Suffice it to say that the conclusion of theologians that women are misbegotten males and prayers of thanks that state, "I thank thee, God, that I was not born a woman," are not temporary aberrations, but typical of the mainstream teaching, with changes coming only slowly, if at all. With that reminder about the profound sexism of the dominant religion myths of our Western culture, I want to spiral back to fairy tales. This time it is to the frog and the princess. The most popular of the frog fairy tales is, of course, the story of the Frog Prince. In this version, a beautiful young princess plays with a golden ball which accidentally rolls into a pond. A frog tries to befriend her and retrieves her ball after he extracts a promise for her to allow him to play, eat, and sleep with her. The princess soon forgets the pledge and, leaving the frog behind, returns to the castle. He follows her and demands that she honor her pledge. She is repelled, but her father, the king, insists that she keep her promise. The princess is progressively overcome with anger and disgust as the frog intrudes more and more in her life. When he demands to sleep with her, she rebels, and in a fit of outrage and revulsion, she smashes the frog against the wall of her bedroom. In that moment, the spell is broken, and the frog is transformed into a magnificent prince, a worthy spouse for the princess. In conventional terms, it is a story of puberty and first sexual encounter, and there are, from a feminist perspective, quite rightly, objections to the imagery of battered, abused women and of the father's insistence she commit unnatural acts. And yet, unlike so many of these tales, there is something redemptive at work in this story. Both the princess and the frog are destined to be changed. In her anger and outrage, the princess rebels against her father in an act of self-assertion. And the frog, too, becomes liberated from his sexual compulsion by first being reduced to nothing by being annihilated against the wall. This is a transformation of consciousness in this tale, not so evident in others. Women, in the process of shedding the feminine mystique and discovering authentic self, are progressively repulsed by the conventional male role. The more macho a man is, the more of a frog he is. And like the frog in the original version, there is no sense felt by these men, by many frogs, that there is indeed a prince, something better awaiting liberation. Some psychologists have noted that some men are more like autistic children, and that there is a fear of being touched, not physically, but in the soul. Fear of expressing feelings, of relating intimately with a compensating fixation on inanimate objects. Not only then are women in need of transformation and consciousness, but men as well. As obvious as this may seem, most frogs have no interest in being anything but a frog. But some do. There are signs of hope. More visitations by God. Transformation of consciousness continues here and there. I think, for example, of the Vietnam veterans who object to war toys. As one veteran put it in a television interview, if they sell G.I. Joe dolls glamorizing war, they ought to make at least some of them amputees to show what war is really like. Or the heroine in the musical For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough, who is emerging from overwhelming affliction and acknowledges a new faith. I found God in myself and have loved her fiercely. Transformation of consciousness glistens. Women are chanting, and the guardians of patriarchy are stepping back, somewhat dazed. For a moment here and there, witness against for a moment that mystery bests authority. We are incomplete, limited, and often too perversely conditioned creatures. Our salvation is self-transcendence and alliance with deeper, creative, mysterious powers within. It is long past time to kiss any patriarchal God the Father goodbye. Long past time to kiss Sleeping Beauty goodbye. Starhawk concludes one of her volumes with a meditation. Tell me, old ones, how did you do it? How did you change it? And they smile. Listen, hear what they say to you. We struggled. We held out our hands and touched each other. We remembered to laugh. We went to endless meetings. We said no. We put our bodies on the line. We said yes. We invented. We created. We walked straight through our fears. We formed the circle. We danced. We spoke the truth. We dared to live it. And our closing hymn is number 318, We Would Be One.